June 17, 1944, 3:47 p.m., Camp Stark, New Hampshire. Obergefreiter Klaus Becker stood frozen beside a garbage bin behind the mess hall, staring at what his captors had just thrown away. Half a loaf of white bread, untouched, 3 whole apples, a quarter-pound of butter still wrapped. Meat, actual meat, scraped off plates like it was nothing. His hands trembled, not from cold, not from fear, from rage. In Hamburg, his mother was eating potato peels. His sister traded her wedding ring for 6 eggs. And here, Americans were throwing away more food in one afternoon than his family had seen in 3 months. Before we continue with Klaus's story, we need your help to keep these forgotten perspectives alive. If you're already hooked by what you're hearing, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube to share this with more people who care about real history. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of the hidden side of World War II. And here's something we love. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Your country, your city. We have viewers from Buenos Aires to Berlin, from Manila to Montreal. Did your grandfather serve? Do you have family stories from the war? We want to hear from you. Now back to Camp Stark, New Hampshire, where Klaus Becker was about to witness something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Klaus Becker was 23 years old, 5'7", a baker's son from Hamburg who'd been drafted into the Wehrmacht in February 1942. Before the war, he'd wake at 4 every morning to help his father prepare dough for the day's bread. He knew the exact weight of flour needed for 72 rolls. He could tell if dough had risen properly just by pressing his thumb into it. He'd been taught that wasting food was a sin, literally. His grandmother had survived the starvation winter of 1916-1917 when the British naval blockade had killed 763,000 German civilians. She'd eaten sawdust bread, turnip soup so thin you could see through it. She'd watched her baby brother die of malnutrition at 18 months old. Never throw away food, she'd told Klaus when he was 6, gripping his wrist so hard it hurt. Never. Men die for a crust of bread. Klaus had been captured 3 weeks earlier during the breakout from the Falaise pocket. He'd surrendered to American troops near Argenton on May 28, 1944. They'd loaded him onto a truck, then a train, then a ship. He'd crossed the Atlantic expecting a prison camp like the ones in Germany, barbed wire, starvation rations, disease. Instead, he'd arrived at Camp Stark on June 3, 1944, and walked into a nightmare of plenty. The mess hall served 3 meals a day, hot meals, with meat. The portions were larger than what Klaus had eaten before the war, when Germany was supposedly prosperous. Breakfast, eggs, bacon, toast, coffee, orange juice. Lunch, soup, sandwiches, fruit, milk. Dinner, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, vegetables, pie. Pie. For prisoners. The other POWs couldn't believe it either. Friedrich Müller, a Panzer Grenadier from Cologne, cried the first time he saw fresh oranges. He hadn't eaten an orange since 1941. Hans Krebs, a machine gunner from Berlin, gained 11 pounds in the first 2 weeks. They were prisoners, and they were eating better than they had as free men in Germany. But it wasn't the abundance that shocked them. It was the waste. Americans threw away food like it was garbage, because to them it was garbage. Bread heels that were too hard, apples with small bruises, chicken skin, potato peels, the fat trimmed off meat, the crust from sandwiches, coffee that had gone cold, milk that was 1 day past fresh. On June 12th, Klaus watched an American guard dump an entire bowl of vegetable soup down the drain because he didn't feel like soup today. The soup was hot. It smelled like carrots and celery and actual beef stock. The guard poured it out, rinsed the bowl and walked away, whistling. Klaus had to leave the room before he did something that would get him shot. The German POWs started talking about it in the barracks at night. Quiet conversations in the dark, speaking in their Hamburg and Berlin and Munich dialects, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. "They don't understand hunger," said Müller, the Panzer Grenadier. "They've never been hungry, not really hungry, not eating grass hungry." "My brother died at Stalingrad," said a Feldwebel named Werner Koch from Dresden. "He wrote me a letter in December 1942. They were eating horses. Then they were eating the leather from their boots. Then they were eating nothing. And here these Americans throw away meat because it's too fatty. Klaus had a friend in the camp, Josef Zimmermann, 21 years old, from a village outside Munich. Josef's father was a farmer, had been a farmer, before the farm was bombed in 1943. Josef had grown up milking cows at dawn, harvesting potatoes in October, slaughtering pigs in December. He understood food as labor. Every potato represented hours of work. Every loaf of bread was someone's sweat. Josef had a plan. He'd been talking about it for days. After the war, he'd go back to Germany and start a farm. A small one. Just enough to feed his family. He'd marry his girlfriend Anna, who was waiting for him in Munich. They'd have children, 3, maybe 4. They'd never be rich, but they'd never be hungry. That was the dream. A farm, a family, enough food. On June 22nd, Josef was assigned to kitchen duty. He was carrying garbage out to the bins behind the mess hall when he saw the day's waste. 2 garbage cans, each one nearly full. He lifted the lids and stared. Dozens of bread rolls, 12 apples, half a roasted chicken, a bowl of mashed potatoes, green beans, a chocolate cake, an entire chocolate cake with only 2 slices missing. The American cooks had made too much for a birthday celebration and just threw the rest away. Josef Zimmermann stood there for 7 minutes, just standing, just looking. Then he started pulling food out of the garbage. An American guard saw him, a sergeant named Mike Patterson from Iowa. Patterson walked over, confused. "What are you doing?" Josef didn't speak much English. He held up an apple, perfectly good, no bruises. He pointed at it, then at his mouth, then at the garbage can, trying to explain, trying to make the American understand that this was food, real food, food that people were dying for in Europe. Patterson frowned. "That's garbage, buddy. You can't eat garbage." Josef tried again. He pulled out the bread rolls. He broke one open to show Patterson it was fresh. He pulled out the chicken, still warm. Patterson radioed for the camp commander. Captain Robert Harrison arrived 3 minutes later. He was from Massachusetts, career military. He'd fought in North Africa and Sicily. He'd seen combat, but he'd never seen a German prisoner cry over thrown-away food. Josef was crying, not sobbing. Just tears running down his face while he clutched a handful of bread rolls and tried to explain in broken English that this was wrong. This was so wrong. People were starving, and how could they throw this away? How could they? Harrison didn't understand, not really. He'd grown up in Boston during the Depression. Sure, times had been hard, but he'd never been hungry. Not the way Josef meant, not the way that changes you forever. "Put the food back," Harrison said quietly. "It's against regulations. You can't take food from the garbage. Health codes." Josef put the food back. He walked to the barracks. He didn't speak for the rest of the day. That night, Klaus couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the garbage cans, the waste, the casual cruelty of abundance. He'd been raised to believe that Americans were soft, decadent, weak. He'd been told that Germany would win the war because Germans were harder, tougher, more disciplined. But now he understood something different, something more terrifying. America was going to win the war because they had so much they could afford to be wasteful. Germany was rationing everything, recycling paper, collecting metal, urging citizens to eat less so soldiers could eat more. The entire nation was on a starvation diet, and they were still losing. Meanwhile, America was throwing away more food in one day than a German family saw in a week. And they weren't even trying. This was normal to them. This was just life. Klaus lay in his bunk and did the math. Camp Stark held 623 German POWs. The mess hall served 3 meals a day. If each meal wasted just 5 pounds of food, and Klaus knew it was more, much more, that was 345 pounds of food per day, thrown away, in one camp. And there were hundreds of camps across America. The numbers were staggering, obscene. While Europe starved, America was drowning in food. The German POWs started a secret project. It began with Klaus and Josef and Müller, then spread to dozens of others. They started salvaging food from the garbage, not eating it. They weren't that desperate. They were being fed well enough, but saving it, cleaning it, preserving it. They pulled out bread and dried it in the sun, turning it into zwieback that could be stored for months. They took apple cores and planted the seeds in a small garden plot the Americans had let them cultivate. They saved butter and sugar and hid it in their barracks, thinking maybe, somehow, they could send it home. They knew it was crazy. They knew they'd never get it past the censors, but they had to do something. They couldn't just watch the waste and do nothing. An American guard named Thomas O'Brien caught them in July. He was from Minnesota, son of farmers. He'd grown up during the Dust Bowl when his family had lost everything. He understood a little better than the others. O'Brien watched Klaus and Joseph washing salvaged apples in a bucket behind Barracks 7. He should have reported them. It was against regulations. But instead, he sat down on the steps and lit a cigarette. "My grandparents came from County Cork," O'Brien said quietly. "Ireland, during the famine, 1847. They ate grass. They ate nettles. They watched their neighbors die in the ditches. My grandmother never threw away food. Never. Even 40 years later, even when they had money, she'd eat every single thing on her plate. She'd yell at us kids if we wasted even a crumb." Klaus looked up at him. They made eye contact. They didn't share a language, not really, but they understood each other. O'Brien stood up. "I didn't see anything here," he said. "You boys stay out of trouble." He walked away. The secret project continued. By August 1944, more than 200 German POWs at Camp Stark were involved in some form of food salvage. They dried fruit. They saved seeds. They composted vegetable scraps to improve the soil in their garden plot. They turned stale bread into breadcrumbs. They rendered fat from meat scraps into cooking lard. They weren't doing it because they were hungry. They were doing it because they couldn't not do it. Wasting food felt like a sin, a violation of something fundamental about survival and respect and human decency. The American guards noticed. Some reported it. Some ignored it. Most just didn't understand what the fuss was about. It was just food. There was always more food. But Klaus noticed something else. The younger American guards, the ones who'd grown up during the Depression, they got it. A little bit. They'd known hard times, not starvation, but hard times. They understood that food had value beyond just eating it. The older guards, the career military guys, they didn't get it at all. And the really young ones, the kids who'd grown up in the early 1940s when the economy was booming from war production, they were completely baffled. Food was just food. If you didn't want it, you threw it away. That's what garbage cans were for. In September 1944, Klaus received a letter from home. It had taken 6 weeks to arrive, filtered through the Red Cross. His mother's handwriting was shaky. Paper was scarce, so she'd written tiny letters, cramming as much as possible onto a single sheet. "We are managing," she wrote. "Do not worry about us." "Your sister traded her coat for potatoes. Real potatoes, Klaus, 12 of them. We made them last a week. We are lucky. The Goldsteins next door are gone. You remember them. We do not know where. Their apartment is empty. Sometimes I think I hear them at night, but it is just the wind." Klaus read the letter 17 times. Then he folded it carefully and put it in his pocket. That evening, he walked to the mess hall for dinner. Roast beef, mashed potatoes, green beans, fresh rolls, apple pie. He ate everything on his plate, slowly, tasting every bite. Then he went back to the barracks and threw up. Joseph found him outside, sitting on the ground with his back against the wall. Joseph didn't say anything. He just sat down next to him. They sat there for 20 minutes in silence. Finally, Klaus spoke. "My mother traded my sister's coat for 12 potatoes. Joseph nodded. "My father's farm is gone, bombed. He wrote that they're living in the barn. The barn, Klaus. And here we have pie." "I hate them," Klaus said quietly. "I hate them for feeding us. I hate them for being kind. I hate them for winning. I hate them for having so much they can throw it away." "I know," Joseph said. They sat in silence again. "When the war is over," Klaus said, "I'm going back to Hamburg. I'm going to work in a bakery again, and I will never, ever throw away bread. Not a crust, not a crumb, never." "I'm going back to Munich," Joseph said. "I'm going to marry Anna. We'll have a farm, a small one, and our children will never know what it's like to be hungry. I promise them that. I promise." Klaus looked at him. "What if we can't keep that promise?" Joseph was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Then at least we'll know what we fought for." The war ended in May 1945. Klaus and Joseph and the other POWs at Camp Stark learned about Germany's surrender from American radio broadcasts. Some of them cried, some of them cheered, relieved it was finally over. Most of them just felt numb. They remained at Camp Stark until November 1945, when they were finally repatriated to Europe. Klaus arrived in Hamburg on December 3, 1945. The city was rubble, 73% destroyed by Allied bombing. His family's bakery was gone, just a pile of bricks, but his mother was alive, his sister was alive. That was more than many could say. Klaus found work at a bakery in the British occupation zone. He married in 1947, had 3 children, worked as a baker for 41 years, retired in 1986. He never talked about the war much. When his grandchildren asked, he'd tell them a few stories, funny ones mostly, harmless ones, but he never threw away bread. His wife learned that quickly. Even a stale heel, even moldy corners, he'd save it, dry it, turn it into breadcrumbs, use it for something. His grandchildren thought he was eccentric, old-fashioned, stuck in the past. They didn't understand. They couldn't. They'd grown up in West Germany during the Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle. They'd never been hungry. They'd never seen their mother trade a coat for potatoes. They'd never stood beside a garbage can in America and realized their enemy had already won because they had so much they could afford to waste it. Josef Zimmermann went back to Munich. He married Anna in 1946. They bought a small farm outside the city in 1949, using money from the Marshall Plan. They had 4 children. The farm was successful. Modest, but successful. Joseph worked it until he was 73 years old when his son took over. Joseph kept a photograph in his study, a black and white photo of an apple. Just an apple, sitting on a table. His children asked him about it once. Why did he have a photograph of an apple? To remember, Joseph said, to remember what matters. They didn't understand, but Joseph did. Every time he looked at that photograph, he remembered June 27, 1944. A garbage can behind a mess hall in New Hampshire, perfectly good food being thrown away while his father ate potato soup in a barn in Germany. The casual abundance of America, the bitter poverty of home. The moment he understood who would win the war and why. Klaus Becker died in 2001 at age 80. His obituary in the Hamburger Abendblatt mentioned that he was a veteran of World War II and a retired baker. It did not mention Camp Stark. It did not mention the garbage cans. It did not mention standing in New Hampshire in 1944, watching Americans throw away more food than his family had seen in months, and understanding in that moment that Germany had already lost. Josef Zimmermann died in 2003 at age 81. His obituary mentioned his farm, his family, his service in the Wehrmacht. It did not mention the chocolate cake in the garbage. It did not mention crying over bread rolls. It did not mention the promise he'd made to himself that his children would never be hungry, and the 47 years he'd spent keeping that promise. There is no memorial to the German POWs who were shocked by American abundance, no museum exhibit about cultural trauma and food waste, no historical marker at the site of Camp Stark, which was demolished in 1947. But if you go to Hamburg today, there are still old men who save bread crusts, who yell at their grandchildren for leaving food on their plates, who refuse to throw away anything that could be eaten, used, saved. Men who remember what hunger felt like, men who remember when food was precious, men who remember the garbage cans in America and can never, ever forget. If this story affected you, if it made you think about waste and abundance and the things we take for granted, hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel to hear more forgotten perspectives from World War II. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? Did your grandparents live through the war? Do they have habits about food that seemed strange to you growing up? Share your family's stories. These memories matter, these lessons matter. Thank you for keeping these voices alive.